Hello, second grade writers. Today we're going to continue with lesson 2. Our writing objective for this lesson is I will be able to write a narrative about character relationships. And we're going to be using Trouble at the Sandbox to do this. Identify character relationships. Characters in a story can have many different kinds of relationships with other characters. Some of the relationships are positive, which means that they're good, and some are negative, which means they're bad. The reader may be able to relate to the character's relationships, thought, or feelings. This helps the reader relate and feel closer and more involved with the characters in the story. Let's look at some guiding questions to help us. What happens in this chapter that helps show the relationship between Theo, Izzy, and Josh? One possible answer is that together they try to protect their trucks. How did the writer show the big boys' relationship with Theo, Izzy, and Josh? A possible answer is by describing how the big boys laughed at the friends and took their trucks. Characters might react differently to other characters. Let's look at our first example from the text. "Hi," Theo said. "Do you want to play in the sandbox too?" The big boy laughed, but it was a mean laugh. It made Theo feel a little scared. The writer shows how the big boy acts towards Theo and Theo's response to that interaction. Let's look at another example. "But we need them," said Josh. "I don't care," said the big boy. He put his hands on his hips. "We want them and we're taking them." The writer provides the reader examples of how the big boy interacts with someone else in Theo's group. The class will work together to write about the relationship between Theo, Josh, and Izzy and the big boys. Think about what Theo and his friends' interactions with the big boys in the story tells us about the characters' relationships. Let's look at this example. When I look at the details about how the big boys interact with Theo, Josh, and Izzy, I see that the first big boy scared Theo. The big boy doesn't seem very nice and doesn't seem to care about the way Theo and his friends feel. The big boy says, "I don't care," when Josh says that they need the trucks. When I'm writing about how the big boys act towards Theo, Josh, and Izzy, they will probably not be very nice. So if we were to come up with a class story, this is one example. One day, Theo and Josh were building a tower with blocks during recess. The big boys walked up to them. Josh looked up and they seemed like giants to him. He was scared. Theo asked them if they wanted to play with them. One boy laughed and kicked down the tower. The other two boys began to laugh. So in lesson 2, in your online writing journal, which is a Google Doc, you're going to type out your answer. Let's look at the directions. It says create a classmate that will interact with the big boys. Write a paragraph that explains how the big boys would respond to that classmate. How would that classmate interact with the big boys? Use details from pages 6 to 8 of Trouble at the Sandbox to support your paragraph. So if I were to come up with a new character, I have to think of a character name. So I might say, the classmate's name is Richard. Okay. Now, maybe Richard wants to ask the big boys, just like in the story, he wants to invite them to play with him. So I might say, Richard asks the big boys to play with him in the sandbox. Now, what do we know about the big boys? We know that they're older and they probably think that playing in the sandbox is just for little kids. So I think that the big boys are not going to react very nicely to Richard. So I might say something like this. The big boys laugh at his invitation to play. They walk away still laughing. Okay, so this is just one example to help you get started. So remember, under lesson 2 in your online writing journal, which is a Google Doc, you're going to create a classmate, explain how the big boys would respond to that classmate, and remember to go back to the text and use pages 6 to 8 of Trouble at the Sandbox. If you have any questions, let me know on my Google Classroom, or when we have our Google Meet, you may ask me. Thank you.